You got it. Here's your story, adapted for an American context with names, places, and events changed to feel natural and easy to understand. Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm sharing a tale of family betrayal where a fortune became the price not just of a car, but of human relationships. Imagine paying an exorbitant amount for a car, only for the keys to suddenly end up in someone else's hands. Get ready for a family drama where everything is on the line: money, relationships, and a sense of self-worth. Enjoy the listening, the unused sedan. The black Toyota Camry had been sitting in the garage of the Auto Enthusiast Cooperative for 6 months now. Dust uniformly coated its once polished hood, headlights, and windows, turning the formerly luxurious foreign car into a gray phantom of past glory. Eleanor Davidson stood by the open garage door, leaning on her cane, looking at her late husband's car as if it were a living being. "How he loved you," she whispered, tracing a wrinkled hand across the hood, leaving a mark on the dusty surface. "Robert used to call you his sweetheart, and every Saturday he'd wash and polish you." The elderly woman sighed heavily. Since her husband died of a stroke last winter, she hadn't driven once. And why would she? Her driver's license had expired 10 years ago, and renewing it at 72 seemed pointless. The retired woman slowly closed the garage door and, with a groan, trudged toward the bus stop. The day was autumnally damp and chilly. The wind whipped tiny raindrops into her face, and the wet asphalt was unpleasantly slippery underfoot. The walk home usually took about 20 minutes, but today, due to her aching joints, the journey stretched to twice that. Climbing to the 3rd floor of her old apartment building, Eleanor sighed with relief as she stepped inside her apartment. Taking off her coat and shoes, she went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sank heavily onto a stool. The image of the dusty car in the garage reappeared before her eyes. What should she do with it, the old woman wondered, looking out the window at the gray apartment buildings. Maintaining a car cost a lot of money: garage fees, insurance, maintenance, and her pension barely covered medication and food. But just selling it, a memory of her husband Robert would turn over in his grave. The telephone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Eleanor slowly got up and shuffled in her slippers to the hallway. "Hello? Hey, Mom! It's Chris," a cheerful voice answered. "How are you? Sarah and I and the kids are planning to come visit you this weekend, if you don't mind." "Of course." "Of course not." The old woman smiled. "I'm always waiting for you all." "Great." Chris's voice became a little strained. "We might be a bit late. Getting around these days is a nightmare. Ethan has music lessons. We take Annie to gymnastics, and with 2 transfers, it's a whole saga." Eleanor pressed her lips together. She perfectly understood what her son was hinting at. It wasn't the first time he'd mentioned his father's car, but how could she just give away such a valuable thing, even to her own son? "Yes, yes, I understand," she answered dryly. "See you Saturday." Chris. Hanging up. The woman returned to the kitchen where the forgotten kettle was already boiling furiously. Pouring herself some tea, she took out a tattered notebook and a calculator from the cupboard. It was time to figure things out. The car was 6 years old, low mileage, excellent condition. Robert had looked after it like a child. "The market price for such a car is around $12,000, Eleanor mused, writing down the figures in small handwriting. Then she paused, thought for a moment, and wrote, "Chris and family, $9,000. A mother's sacrifice and a son's plan. At the same time, on the other side of the city, Sarah Miller was trying to put her 4-year-old daughter, Annie, to sleep. Annie was fussy after a long day at daycare. "Mommy, I don't want to sleep," the girl whined, tossing and turning in bed. "Tell me a story." "Annie, it's late." Sarah sighed, adjusting her daughter's blanket. "You need to get enough sleep for daycare tomorrow." "But why doesn't Grandpa Robert drive us in the car anymore?" the girl suddenly asked. "It was more fun with him. He always gave me candy and played cartoons." Sarah smiled sadly. "Grandpa's in heaven now, sweetie. Remember we talked about that? I remember. Annie nodded. And his car, is it in heaven too? No. The car's in Grandma Eleanor's garage. Chris peeked into the room with 7-year-old Ethan, who was already in his pajamas. Dad, why won't Grandma give us Grandpa's car? The boy asked loudly. You said she doesn't even drive it anymore. Chris shot his son a warning glance. It's Grandma's car. She decides what to do with it. When the children finally fell asleep, the couple went to the kitchen. Chris took a bottle of beer from the fridge, and Sarah poured herself some tea. I called Mom today, Chris began, taking a sip from the bottle. Still trying to bring up the car, Sarah sighed. And how she just pretends not to understand your hints, as usual. He tapped his fingers irritably on the table. You know what's most frustrating? She doesn't need it at all. Her license is expired. She's afraid to drive. She has no money for upkeep. And here we are, with 2 kids, struggling on buses. Maybe she wants to sell it, Sarah suggested. After all, extra money is never a bad thing, especially on a pension. Who's she going to sell it to? Put out an ad, bring strangers to the garage. Chris shook his head. No, she just, she's always had this trait. Never giving anything away for free. There always has to be some kind of exchange, conditions, or payment. Sarah silently looked out the window. She had a good relationship with her mother-in-law, but she had also noticed this trait in Eleanor. Even when she brought toys for the grandchildren, there was always a reminder of how much she'd spent and how they should appreciate her generosity. What if, Sarah began slowly, what if we offer her money for the car, not the full market price? Of course, but an amount that shows her we're serious about this. Chris thought about it. Actually, that's an idea. But where would we get the money? We have a mortgage, a loan for renovations. I have a savings account I opened before we got married, Sarah offered. It's not a lot, but it's enough for a down payment. The rest we can borrow from friends. Are you sure? Chris looked at his wife carefully. That's your savings. I'm sure, she answered firmly. We need this car. Chris, with 2 kids, work, and all the activities, we're going crazy with these public transport commutes. That night, they discussed the plan of action at length, calculating amounts and sources of loans. And on the other side of the city, Eleanor was also awake. She sat in her armchair by the window, flipping through old photographs. Here was Robert with his brand new car. Here they were, the whole family, at the cabin. Here were the children, Chris and Mia, in the back seat, eating ice cream. The old woman's gaze lingered on a photograph of her daughter. Mia lived in a neighboring city with her husband, David. Unlike the steady Chris, her daughter had always been flighty and impulsive. She'd rushed into marriage for love, changed jobs like gloves. Now, she and her husband rented a studio apartment and dreamed of owning their own home. Mia could really use the car, too, Eleanor thought, stroking the photograph. And they need money for a down payment on a mortgage. In the morning, she called her daughter. Mia, dear, I have something to discuss with you. The old woman began after the greetings. You know your dad's car is just sitting there. Mom, you decided to sell it, Mia quickly asked. Not exactly. I thought, what if I sign it over to you? David drives. Doesn't he? Silence hung on the other end of the line. Mom, are you serious? Mia finally breathed. But what about Chris? He's had his eye on it for ages. Eleanor pursed her lips. Your brother never shares anything. It's always me, me, me. But you and David need both a car and money for an apartment. Money for an apartment? Mia sounded surprised. Yes, my dear. Eleanor smiled into the phone. I have a plan. Come this weekend, and we'll discuss everything. Hanging up. The old woman smiled contentedly. The plan was starting to come together in her head. Let Chris think he'll get everything for free. It's time my son learned generosity, and at the same time helped his sister with housing. the family gathering, and a shocking revelation. The next day, Chris called his mother with a direct offer. "Mom, Sarah and I want to talk about Dad's car. We're ready to buy it from you." Eleanor, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, straightened up like a board. "Buy it," she repeated. "You mean you want me to sell you your father's car?" "Yes, Mom," Chris replied firmly. "You know yourself that you don't need it, and it would be a huge help to us with the kids. We're offering $9,000. Eleanor remained silent, frantically calculating options. Her plan with Mia was almost ready, but her son's offer opened up new possibilities. $9,000, you say, she slowly uttered. "Well, come on Saturday. We'll discuss it." Ending the call, she immediately dialed her daughter's number. "Mia, darling, plans are changing a little, but for the better. You'll see." "Okay." The rainy Saturday was a nerve-wracking day for all involved in the impending transaction. Sarah spent the morning counting cash, spreading stacks of bills on the coffee table. $7,000 they had borrowed from friends and colleagues, $2,000 withdrawn from her personal savings, $9,000, a sum that seemed immense for a young family with a mortgage and 2 children. "Are you sure this is the right decision?" Sarah asked, putting the money into an envelope. "Maybe we should have looked for other options." Chris shook his head. "We won't find anything suitable cheaper. Besides, it's Dad's car. I know it's in perfect condition." He sighed. "Of course, ideally, Mom could just give it to us. But we know your mom." Sarah finished softly for him. "She has her own principles." The children sat in the next room, engrossed in cartoons. Today they were to spend the day at their neighbor, Miss Robinson's house while their parents dealt with the car. "Dad, are we going to ride in the new car today?" Ethan asked, peeking out of the room. "If everything goes well, we'll be riding in it soon." Chris smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Now get ready. Aunt Lisa is waiting for you." At the same time, preparations were also underway at Eleanor's apartment. The old woman bustled in the kitchen, preparing refreshments for her guests. Today, both families were to gather Chris and Sarah, and Mia and David. Her daughter and son-in-law had already arrived last night and spent the night in the living room on the pull-out couch. "Mom, are you sure this is a good idea?" Mia asked, helping to cut the salad. "Chris is going to be furious." Eleanor pursed her lips. "What's the big deal? I signed the car over to David a week ago." "You're my children. I decide who gets what." David, a strong man of 30 with a perpetually mocking expression on his face, sprawled in the armchair with his tablet. "Mother-in-law's right," he scoffed, without looking up from the screen. "The car's much better off with me than with your accountant brother. He drives like a senior citizen, barely moving, yields to everyone." Mia shot her husband an annoyed glance. "But he drives safely and takes the kids." Yes, and for that, we'll reward him with a down payment on an apartment," Eleanor chimed in, taking a cabbage pie out of the oven. $9,000. Can you imagine what a help that will be for your mortgage?" David perked up. "Listen, that's an idea. We could even look at a 2-bedroom instead of a studio." Mia nervously fidgeted with the edge of her apron. "I still don't like this. We should tell Chris beforehand." "We don't owe him anything," Eleanor snapped. "It's a surprise. Besides, they're already here." She gestured towards the window, from which a taxi pulling up to the building could be seen. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Chris and Sarah stood on the doorstep, a little tense but resolute. "Hello, Mom?" Chris kissed his mother on the cheek. "We didn't know you had other guests." Sarah, noticing Mia and David in the depths of the apartment, looked at her husband questioningly. He shrugged almost imperceptibly. His sister and brother-in-law's appearance was also unexpected for him. Come in," Eleanor bustled. "I've made tea, baked a pie. Let's sit down as a family, and then we'll talk business." A tense atmosphere settled over the table. Chris politely exchanged news with his sister. Sarah maintained conversation with Eleanor about the children, while David silently devoured pie. occasionally casting mocking glances at Chris. "Well," Eleanor finally said, when the tea was drunk and the pie almost eaten, "let's get down to business, the reason we've gathered." Chris straightened up and placed the envelope of money on the table. "We're ready. Mom, here's $9,000 as we agreed." Mia tensed, and David suppressed a smirk. Turning to the window, Eleanor leisurely took the envelope, opened it, and began methodically counting the bills. All correct. $9,000. She nodded after finishing the count. "Well, thank you, son. So, when should we go to complete the paperwork?" "Today," Chris asked. Eleanor smiled softly. "You see, Chris, that won't be necessary. The documents are already processed." A heavy silence fell in the room. "What do you mean, already processed?" Chris slowly uttered. "I signed the car over to David a week ago." Eleanor calmly explained. "Mia and her husband need transportation too. And this money," she patted the envelope with her palm, "will go towards their down payment on an apartment. You helped your sister so wonderfully, without even knowing it." Chris turned pale. Sarah stared in shock, alternating between her mother-in-law and her husband. "Mom, you're serious," Chris choked out. "You took money from us for a car you already gave to David. Not just gave, but gifted," Eleanor clarified. "And your money isn't for me, but for your sister. Isn't it wonderful the whole family wins?" Sarah opened her purse and took out a folder with documents. "Eleanor, you don't understand. We went into debt for this money. Look." She spread the papers on the table. "Receipts, loan agreements. We now owe so many people." Now, don't be so dramatic." Her mother-in-law waved her hand. "Debts, you'll work them off. You're still young." "Mom," Chris's voice trembled with suppressed rage. "You put us in a terrible position. Give us the money back, right now." But David had already taken the envelope from his mother-in-law's hand. "No, buddy. We've already picked out an apartment." Mia, pale as a sheet, finally dared to intervene. "Chris, I didn't know. I really didn't know Mom would do this. We'll give you the money back. I promise." "We're not giving anything back," David interjected, pouring himself another tea. "The money's going towards the apartment, as planned. And the car stays with me. It's all fair and square." "Fair and square." Sarah jumped up from her chair. "You cheated us, lured us here knowing the car no longer belonged to Eleanor, and then took all our money." "I didn't cheat anyone," her mother-in-law retorted unfazed. "I simply disposed of my property as I saw fit, and now both my children are settled. Mia has an apartment, David has a car, and you, Chris, you could have figured it out yourself. Help your sister instead of waiting for your mother to organize everything." Chris slowly rose from the table. You just..." He gasped with indignation, trying to snatch the money from David, but David deftly struck Chris in the solar plexus. The blow sent Chris doubling over. "Wait!" Sarah turned to Mia in desperation. "You understand this isn't right, don't you? We borrowed this money from friends. We have to pay it back in a month." Mia looked helplessly at her mother, then at her husband. "If you think about it, it was Eleanor who gave us the money, not you." "The conversation is over," Eleanor snapped. "Chris, don't behave like a child. What's the big deal about helping your sister with a home? Isn't that a good deed?" "It's not a good deed, Mom," Chris said quietly. "It's despicable, and I'll never forgive you for this." He took Sarah's hand and headed for the exit. At the door, he turned back. "You can stop calling us now. And don't come visit. You no longer have grandchildren." "Chris!" Eleanor cried out, but it was too late. The door had already slammed shut behind her son and daughter-in-law. Mia, in tears, turned to her mother. "Why did you do this? Why did you make us fight with Chris?" "Don't be dramatic," Eleanor scoffed. He'll cool down and come back. And for now, this is your down payment for the apartment. Enjoy it." David rubbed his hands together contentedly. "Thanks, mother-in-law. And don't worry about Chris. He'll get over it. He's not a little kid anymore. He should understand that family has to share." Todd. The lingering emptiness ate her that evening. After Mia and David had driven away in their new car, Eleanor sat alone in the empty apartment. Calls to Chris went unanswered. Her son had blocked her number. Attempts to reach Sarah were also unsuccessful. "They're offended," the old woman thought, looking out into the dark window. "It's nothing. They'll get over it. They'll understand that a mother knows best how to manage family property." But she felt uneasy. For the first time in many years, Eleanor felt a pang of conscience. Perhaps she had indeed gone too far. But she had only wanted the best, to help Mia and teach Chris generosity. That night, she couldn't sleep for a long time, tossing and turning in bed, listening to the silence of the phone, and in Chris and Sarah's apartment, they weren't sleeping either. The young woman sobbed in the kitchen while her husband methodically compiled a list of everyone they owed. "What are we going to do now?" Sarah choked out. "We have a mortgage, loans, and now these debts too." "I don't know," Chris replied dully. "But one thing I know for sure, I'm not talking to Mom anymore, and I'm not letting the kids go near her. Maybe you should talk to Mia." She seemed to understand that this was wrong. "Mia," Chris smiled bitterly. "She was always Mom's favorite. She pretended to sympathize, but she's probably picking out an apartment with our money right now." He took out his phone and blocked not only his mother's number, but also his sister's. "That's it," he said, putting down the phone. "For me, this family no longer exists." Sarah silently hugged her husband, unable to find words of comfort. In the next room, the children slept peacefully, unaware of the family drama that had unfolded that day. Check. Echoes of the past, almost 6 months passed. Chris and Sarah's family life found a new rhythm, without Grandma Eleanor and Aunt Mia. The children were told that Grandma was sick and couldn't have visitors. Ethan seemed to accept the explanation, but little Annie often asked when Grandma would come back from heaven, and each question pierced Sarah's heart. The family's financial situation gradually stabilized. Sarah took on extra work in the evenings, translating technical texts for a foreign company. Chris negotiated a raise at his main job and worked as a consultant on weekends. They paid off their debts gradually, saving on everything from clothes to entertainment. "Dad, when are we going to the cabin?" Ethan asked one evening at dinner. "Summer's coming soon." Chris exchanged glances with Sarah. The cabin was also connected to his mother, the family plot where they used to go all together. "I don't know, son," he answered honestly. "We'll see how things go." But I want to swim and pick berries," the boy insisted, "and ride my bike. We'll figure something out," Sarah promised, stroking her son's head. "Maybe we can visit friends who have a cabin." At the same time, on the other side of the city, Eleanor sat in her armchair by the window. The apartment seemed too large and empty without her son's calls and her grandchildren's visits. She still called every week, but Chris's number remained unreachable, and Sarah didn't reply to messages. The old woman wrote long letters in the messenger, talking about her days, asking about her grandchildren. In response, silence. Mia and David rarely visited, even though they had bought an apartment in a neighboring district, a 2-bedroom with good renovations. The mortgage was for 15 years, the down payment exactly $9,000. Eleanor had been invited to the housewarming, but the celebration was awkward without her brother and his family. "Maybe you should try to make up with him," Mia cautiously asked when she and her mother were doing dishes after the party. "I'd talked to him, but he blocked me too." "He'll come around when he cools down," Eleanor stubbornly replied, though her voice wavered. "He's not a little boy anymore. He should understand that Mom wanted the best." David, overhearing the conversation, scoffed from the next room. "Oh, come on. You're both good. Chris is just greedy." Jealous that the car is mine now and we got an apartment too. A double blow to his ego. That's why he's mad. Mia shot her husband an angry glance but remained silent. Lately, she had increasingly noticed that David acted as if he had done her a favor by marrying her. Perhaps it had always been that way, and she just hadn't paid attention. The black Toyota Camry sat in the parking lot of their new building. David immediately fell in love with the car, going out in the mornings to wipe it down, admiring it. To Mia, it seemed he was prouder of it than of their new apartment, and he drove, especially, fast. "I'll be home early today, honey," David said one day, kissing his wife before leaving for work. "Let's drive around to the city at night. Grab dinner somewhere. It's Friday." After all, Mia smiled. Lately, they rarely went out together. Just work, home, mortgage. "I'd love to. I bought a new dress too. I've been wanting to show you." "Perfect," David winked. "You'll be the prettiest one at the restaurant." Yeah. A tragic end that evening. Mia spent a long time getting ready. She did her makeup, styled her hair, and put on her new dark blue dress with an open back. When the doorbell rang, she was completely ready. David whistled when he saw his wife. "Wow, you're on fire. Trying to match your fancy car." Mia playfully replied, taking her purse. They took the elevator downstairs and stepped out into the courtyard. David dramatically opened the car door for his wife. "Please, my queen." Mia climbed into the passenger seat, inhaling the pleasant scent of new leather. The car was indeed in excellent condition. Robert had cared for it like a living being. "Where are we going?" Mia asked as her husband started the engine. "A short drive around the city first." David smiled, pulling out of the courtyard. "I want to show you what this beauty can do." From the first minutes of the drive, Mia felt something was wrong. David floored the gas at traffic lights, braked sharply, took turns at high speed. The car swerved, but her husband just laughed, seeing the fear on his wife's face. "David, slower, please," Mia pleaded as the speedometer crossed 60 miles per hour within city limits. "Relax, baby, this is a beast, not a car," her husband exclaimed excitedly, changing lanes without signaling. "Watch what I can do." He sharply swerved the wheel, overtaking a slow-moving minivan over a solid double yellow line. The oncoming car honked angrily. The driver made an obscene gesture. "Are you crazy?" Mia clutched the door handle. "You're going to kill us." "Oh, come on. I've got everything under control." David dismissed her. "Just look at that sunset. Beautiful." They drove onto the highway. Here, the traffic was lighter, and David really let loose. The speedometer needle climbed to 80 mph. Mia fell silent, realizing that pleas were useless. She only prayed for this madness to end quickly. At the restaurant, David was in high spirits, joking a lot and ordering expensive wine. The adrenaline from the fast driving seemed to have only fueled him. "Maybe we should call a taxi home," Mia cautiously suggested as they finished their third bottle. "You've had a lot to drink." "Are you kidding?" David winked. "I'm perfectly fine. Besides, you can't leave the car here. It's not a great neighborhood." They drove home even faster. Mia, with trembling hands, buckled up and closed her eyes, unable to look at the lights flashing outside the window. David turned the music up full blast and sang along, holding the steering wheel with one hand and tapping the dashboard to the rhythm with the other. "Look what I can do!" he yelled, suddenly swerving onto a deserted night road leading to a residential area. "Now we're going to really open it up." The speedometer needle trembled and crept upwards, 90, 95, 100 mph. "David, for God's sake, stop!" Mia screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the thundering music. The turn appeared suddenly. David noticed it too late and slammed on the brakes. The car skidded, hydroplaning on the wet asphalt from the evening dew. The last thing Mia saw was a massive concrete utility pole flying directly at them. The impact was horrific. Metal crumpled like paper. The windshield shattered into 1,000 fragments. Airbags deployed, but at such speed, they could only cushion, not prevent the consequences. Eleanor woke up to a persistent phone call. The clock showed 3:00 a.m. The old woman's heart painfully tightened. Calls at such a time never boded well. "Hello?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Eleanor Davidson," a formal male voice answered. "This is a nurse from City General Hospital number 3. Your daughter, Mia Davidson, was involved in a car accident. Her condition is critical. You need to come immediately." The old woman felt a coldness spread throughout her body. "And her husband, David, the other injured party. He's in the ICU. His condition is extremely serious. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, head trauma. We're doing everything possible, but the prognosis is unfavorable. You'll get more information on site. Can you come?" Yes, of course," Eleanor stammered, struggling to get out of bed. "I'm on my way." The taxi rushed her to the hospital in 20 minutes. All the way. The old woman whispered prayers she remembered from childhood. Just let her be alive. Just let her be alive, hammered in her head. At the emergency room, she was met by a tired, middle-aged doctor. "Are you Mia Davidson's mother?" he asked, looking at a tablet with her medical history. "Yes, that's me. Where is she? What happened to her?" Eleanor clutched the doctor's sleeve. The doctor sighed heavily and took off his glasses. "I'm very sorry, but your daughter passed away on the way to the hospital. The injuries sustained in the accident were incompatible with life." Eleanor staggered. The world around her swam, blurred like a watercolor painting in the rain. A nurse barely managed to catch the falling woman. "And David?" the old woman asked faintly when they had seated her on a couch and given her water. "My son-in-law, he's in the ICU," the doctor replied. "His condition is extremely serious. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, head trauma. We're doing everything possible, but the prognosis is unfavorable." "I want to see her," Eleanor whispered. "Of course." The doctor nodded. "Follow me." In the cold morgue room, under the harsh light of the lamps, Mia lay pale, motionless, with bruises on her face and abrasions. In her dark blue, open-backed dress, Eleanor couldn't believe it was her daughter, her cheerful, vibrant Mia, the girl who loved to sing, dance, dream. "My daughter." The old woman collapsed to her knees before the gurney, embracing the cold body. Forgive me. Betty." The unthinkable news. Chris received a call early in the morning. An unfamiliar number, a woman's voice. "Chris Miller, this is a nurse from City General Hospital number 3. Your mother, Eleanor Davidson, has been admitted to us with a heart attack." "What?" Chris jumped out of bed, waking Sarah sleeping next to him. What happened?" "Last night, your sister was in a car accident. Unfortunately, she died at the scene. Your brother-in-law is in the ICU. When your mother was informed of what happened, she suffered a massive heart attack." Chris sank onto the edge of the bed, unable to comprehend what he had heard. "Mia died?" he asked again, feeling his throat constrict. "Yes, I'm very sorry. The car hit a pole at high speed. According to witnesses, the driver lost control." Sarah, now fully awake, looked at her husband with alarm. "And Mom?" Chris struggled for words. "She's in stable but critical condition. She's in the ICU. The doctors are doing everything they can, but she needs the support of her family. Can you come?" "Yes, of course." Chris got up, mechanically putting on his pants. "I'm leaving now." Ending the call, he briefly explained the situation to Sarah. She silently hugged her husband, understanding that no words could help now. "Go," she said softly. "I'll take care of the kids." "Let's go together." Chris shook his head. "This is your family too." They left the children with the neighbor and rushed to the hospital. All the way, Chris was silent, staring out the taxi window with a blank gaze. Scenes from his childhood flashed before his eyes, he and Mia playing hide and seek at the cabin, building a snowman, her, so small, falling asleep in his arms. At the hospital, they were met by the same tired doctor. "Your mother's condition has stabilized, but remains critical," he informed them. "The first 24 hours after a heart attack are the most crucial. She's conscious now, but very weak." "And David?" Chris asked. "My brother-in-law." "I'm sorry, but he passed away an hour ago," the doctor replied softly. "The injuries were incompatible with life." Sarah squeezed her husband's hand. Chris closed his eyes, trying to control his emotions. "Can I see Mom?" "Only for 5 minutes." The doctor nodded. "And please, no agitation." Eleanor lay in the intensive care unit, hooked up to wires and tubes. The cardiac monitor beeped steadily, counting her heartbeats, seeing her son. The old woman weakly smiled and extended a hand. "Chris, you came." "Mom." Chris sank onto the chair beside the bed, gently squeezing his mother's hand. "How are you?" "I'm dying, son," Eleanor whispered. "Mia's gone, and David too. All because of me. Because of that cursed car." "Quiet. Don't worry." Chris stroked her hand. "You'll get better. We'll get through this. Forgive me." Tears streamed down the old woman's wrinkled cheeks. "I was so cruel. So foolish. I thought I was doing the best, but in reality, I ruined everything." "It's all right, Mom," Chris said softly, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "I forgave you a long time ago." It was a white lie, but at that moment, he truly felt the anger and resentment recede, replaced by sympathy and pain. "My children, my grandchildren," Eleanor whispered. "Are they well?" "Yes, Mom. They're fine. They ask about you." A weak smile touched the old woman's pale lips. "Tell them Grandma loves them very much." At that moment, the monitor suddenly beeped faster, more erratically. Eleanor shuddered, her hand weakly slipping from her son's grasp. "Mom!" Chris jumped up. "Mom!" Doctors and nurses rushed into the room, pushing Chris to the wall. "Blood pressure dropping, pulse thready," someone shouted. "Defibrillator. Quick, clear." Chris watched in a daze as the doctors tried to restart his mother's stopped heart. One shock, a second, a third. The line on the monitor remained flat. "Time of death, 43. The doctor finally said, removing his gloves. "I'm very sorry." Chris didn't remember leaving the room. In the hallway, Sarah was waiting for him. From her face, he knew she already knew everything. "Chris," she hugged her husband tightly. "I'm so sorry." "She died thinking I forgave her," he said dully, pressing his face into his wife's shoulder. "That's good. That's right." A new purpose. The cemetery was bathed in autumn gold, 2 fresh graves side by side, as befitted mother and daughter. Chris stood, holding the hands of his subdued children. Ethan, understanding what had happened, cried softly. Little Annie looked confusedly at the photographs of Grandma and Aunt Mia, adorned with black ribbons. "Dad, are Grandma and Aunt Mia in heaven now?" she asked, tugging at his sleeve. "Yes, sweetie." Chris picked his daughter up. "Now they're in heaven with Grandpa." "And can they see us from there?" "Of course they can." Chris held his daughter tighter, trying to hold back tears. "And they love you very much." When everyone had left, Chris lingered at the graves. From his coat pocket, he took out the steering wheel, a salvaged piece from the wrecked Toyota Camry. The car had become a heap of metal, a grave for 2 people. "That's it, Mom," Chris said softly, placing the steering wheel on the fresh mound of earth. "Rest in peace." The wind caught the yellow leaves, swirled them over the cemetery, and carried them off into the distance, towards the gray autumn horizon. Rebuilding and remembering. Winter was snowy and cold. The city was covered in a white blanket, the rooftops and trees adorned with fluffy snow caps. Chris stood by his apartment window, watching the children in the yard building a snowman. Among them was his son, Ethan, in a bright blue jacket and striped hat. Almost 3 months had passed since the funeral. 3 months that had turned his life upside down, forced him to reevaluate his values and rethink his relationship with the past. The grief and pain of loss hadn't disappeared, but he had learned to live with them, as one lives with a chronic illness, accepting the inevitable. "Dad, look." Annie ran to the window, pointing at her brother. "Ethan's making a snowman. I want to, too." Chris smiled, looking at his daughter. Little Annie had handled the loss best of all. At 4 years old, she didn't fully understand the finality of death. Sometimes she would ask when Grandma would come back from heaven, and it would break his heart. "Do you want to go to your brother?" Chris crouched down in front of his daughter. "Let's get dressed and I'll take you." While they were getting dressed, Sarah entered the room with a stack of papers in her hands. "The notary just called," she said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "All the inheritance documents are ready for pickup." Chris nodded, zipping up Annie's jacket. "Okay, I'll go tomorrow." After his mother and sister's deaths, the question of inheritance naturally arose. Eleanor had left a 3-bedroom apartment, and Mia and David had the 2-bedroom bought with Chris and Sarah's money. There were no other heirs besides Chris. "Have you decided what we're going to do with the apartments?" Sarah cautiously asked when Chris and the children returned from their walk. They had discussed this question many times in recent months. Their own apartment was too small for a family with 2 children. A studio converted into a 1-bedroom by sacrificing the living room. Moving into his mother's 3-bedroom would solve their housing problem, but Chris kept postponing the decision. "I don't know," he admitted honestly later that evening when the children were asleep. "On the one hand, we need more space. On the other, I'm not sure I can live in Mom's apartment." Too many memories. Sarah nodded understandingly. "And what about Mia's apartment?" "I think we should sell it, pay off the remaining mortgage, and put the money aside for the kids' education." The next day, Chris went to the notary's office. The frosty air nipped at his cheeks, and fresh snow crunched underfoot. The city was getting ready for the new year. Garlands twinkled in shop windows, and Christmas trees were being set up in town squares. The notary, an elderly man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, met Chris in his office. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to the armchair opposite his desk. "All documents are ready for signing. As the sole heir, you receive ownership of both apartments and the remaining funds in the accounts." "What accounts?" Chris was surprised. "Mom had some savings." "Small ones." "Yes." The notary put on his glasses and looked through the papers. "About $3,000. However, your sister and her husband had more debts than savings. Mortgage, consumer loan, all of that now passes to you along with the property." Chris slowly nodded, taking the folder of documents. "So I'll have to pay off their debts if I accept the inheritance." "Yes. The alternative is to reject the inheritance entirely, but then you lose the apartments as well." "I understand. Thank you." Leaving the notary's office, Chris didn't go straight home. His feet led him to his mother's house. The 5-story apartment building looked exactly as it had 6 months ago, when he last slammed the door here, leaving with Sarah. Back then, Eleanor, still alive, had yelled something about ingratitude after him. Chris took out his keys and went up to the 3rd floor. The door opened with a creak. No one had oiled the hinges in a long time. The apartment smelled stale, like an unoccupied space. He walked down the hallway, peeked into the kitchen where they had all sat together recently, drinking tea and eating pie, where that fateful scene with the money had taken place. In the small room that had served as Robert's study, nothing had changed. The same desk with a lamp, bookshelves, an old armchair. On the desk, a stack of papers, letters, receipts. Chris mechanically shuffled through them when his gaze caught on a familiar bank logo. It was David's credit card statement. Skimming the lines, Chris froze. A purchase at a jewelry store, flowers, a restaurant, all on the same day, but not for Mia. The recipient of the flowers was a completely different woman's name. He was cheating on her. A bitter thought flashed through his mind. Chris put the statement aside and continued sifting through the papers. Among them, he found another oddity, a receipt for detective agency services, made out to Eleanor Davidson, dated 2 weeks before that fateful Saturday. Something didn't add up. Why would his mother need a detective? Chris pulled out his phone and dialed the number listed on the receipt. "Confidant Detective Agency. How can I help you?" A woman's voice answered. "Good day. My name is Chris Miller. My mother, Eleanor Davidson, was your client. I found a receipt for your services, but I don't know what kind of investigation she ordered." "One moment." Papers rustled on the other end of the line. "Yes, I found it. Eleanor Davidson paid for surveillance on a certain David Lewis. It was surveillance with a photo report." Chris felt a cold dread inside. "And can I know the results?" "Only with proof of inheritance. This is confidential information. I'll be there in an hour with the documents." At the agency, Chris was handed a sealed envelope after the inheritance papers were verified. Returning to his mother's apartment, he sat in his father's armchair and tore open the package. Inside were photographs of David with various women, in cafes, by apartment entrances, at hotels, in the car, that very black Toyota Camry. Judging by the dates, David had been cheating on Mia regularly, with at least 3 different women. Attached to the photos was a short note from the detective. "Client uses vehicle for meetings with mistresses, regularly exceeds speed limits, violates traffic laws, twice observed driving under the influence." Chris leaned back in the armchair, trying to comprehend what he saw. Mother knew. She knew David was cheating on her daughter. She knew he was reckless on the road, and she still gave him the car, taking money from her son. But why? Why, it made no sense. He continued sifting through the papers and found another envelope marked "Open in case of my death," in his mother's handwriting. Inside lay a letter. "Chris, my son, if you're reading this letter, it means I am no longer alive. Forgive me if you can. I made a terrible mistake, one I've paid for every day since you left. When I found out David was cheating on Mia, I was furious. But what angered me even more was how he treated your father's car. Speeding, drinking, behind the wheel, driving his mistresses around. I wanted to take the car back from him, but it was too late. The documents were already transferred. I tried to talk to Mia, but she didn't believe me. She said I just wanted to make them fight. And then I found out David was taking out new loans in Mia's name, plunging her into debt. He was losing money in online casinos, and he told her he was investing in a business. I became scared for my daughter, and ashamed before you. After all, I myself brought this man into our family. I myself gave him the car that should have gone to you. I don't know how things turned out by the time you read this letter, but know that I loved both of you equally, both you and Mia. I just didn't know how to show it properly. If something happens to me, don't abandon your sister. Help her get out of this marriage, and for God's sake, take the car from David. He'll kill someone with it. Your mom." The letter was dated a week before that Saturday when the deception with the money occurred. So, his mother already knew the truth about David then, but still went through with her scheme. Chris sat in a daze, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Something eluded his understanding, some important fragment. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Sarah reminded him that they had promised the children to go ice skating that evening. "I'm on my way," Chris replied, gathering the papers into the folder. "There's something we need to talk about. We'll discuss it at home." That evening, after the children had tired themselves out at the ice rink and fallen asleep, Chris showed Sarah the documents he had found. "This is all very strange," she said, examining the letter and photographs. "Your mom knew David was a scoundrel, but she still gave him the car and our money." Exactly. Chris nodded. The picture doesn't make sense. Maybe she planned to fix the situation somehow later, when Mia was convinced of her husband's infidelity. Possibly. But why so complicated? Why not just show Mia these photos right after we left? Maybe she didn't have time or was waiting for the right moment. More questions remained than answers. But one thing was clear: Eleanor, with all her flaws, had tried to protect her daughter, albeit in a strange, convoluted way. A legacy of love and loss. A month later, Chris had finished all the inheritance formalities. Mia's apartment had to be sold to pay off the mortgage and other debts left behind by her and David. It turned out David had large debts to microfinance organizations and private lenders. Chris decided not to sell his mother's apartment. After long discussions, he and Sarah concluded that moving there would be the most sensible decision. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked as they began packing. "Won't it be hard to live there after everything?" "It will be at first," Chris answered honestly. "But it's my childhood home. Mia and I grew up there. Our children should grow up there too." The move was planned for early spring. In the meantime, they gradually updated Eleanor's apartment, doing renovations, changing wallpaper, buying new furniture. The children enthusiastically chose how to decorate their rooms. One day, while tidying the storage room, Chris discovered a box of old photo albums sitting on the floor amidst the scattered items. He began flipping through the pages, examining the yellowed pictures. Here he was with Mia, still very small, playing in the sandbox. Here was their first day of school, a festive lineup. Here their father teaching him to ride a bicycle, family celebrations, birthdays, trips to the beach. Among the photographs, Chris found an envelope with negatives and several undeveloped film rolls. Setting them aside, he continued sorting through the box and came across a worn-out notebook. It was his mother's diary, which she had kept in recent years. He hesitated for a long time before opening it. Reading someone else's diary felt like an invasion of privacy, but Eleanor was no longer here, and questions remained. The entries in the diary were short, more like notes. His mother recorded events, her thoughts, her plans. Chris flipped through the pages until he reached the entries dated the day before that fateful day when she took the money from them. "Today, the detective sent new photos. It's worse than I thought. David is meeting some girl right in Dad's car. In Robert's car. How dare he? And Mia sees nothing, trusts him. Chris called, wants to buy the car." I almost agreed, but then I thought, what if I used the situation? Let David get the car, and then he'll expose himself. Mia will see who he really is. Yes, there will be a scandal, but at least she'll get rid of that scoundrel. I've thought of everything. David is already bragging about the car to his friends, driving his girls around. I'll pay the detective to follow him for another month. Then I'll show Mia all the evidence. She'll cry, argue, but she'll understand that I was right. And Chris, of course, he'll be offended, but I'll return his money as soon as Mia files for divorce. I'll explain everything. Show him the photos. My son will understand that I acted in the family's best interests. Chris was always a reasonable boy. The next entry was dated the evening of the day the conflict occurred. Everything went wrong. Chris was too offended, didn't even let me explain the plan. Sarah showed me the debt documents. I didn't know they borrowed money from so many people. Now they don't want to talk to me. Mia is crying, saying I made her fight with her brother. David just sneers, says Chris is greedy and jealous. How wrong I was about that man. I need to fix everything. Tomorrow I'll go to the bank, withdraw money from my account, and give it back to Chris. Let David be angry. Let Mia cry. But I must reconcile with my son. Family is the most important thing. That was the last entry. The next day never came for Eleanor. The accident, her daughter's death, a heart attack. Chris closed the diary and pressed it to his chest, his throat constricted with rising tears. His mother had indeed wanted the best, in her own clumsy, convoluted way, but she wanted to protect her daughter and preserve the family. Sarah found him in the same position, sitting on the floor among scattered photographs, holding the diary. "What happened?" she asked anxiously, sitting down beside him. Chris silently handed her the notebook. While Sarah read, he looked out the window, where snow was slowly falling, covering the city in a white blanket of oblivion. "Your poor mother," Sarah finally said, closing the diary. She got caught up in her own intrigues. "Yes," Chris quietly agreed. "And we all paid a very high price for it." He stood up, dusted off his pants, and helped his wife up. "Let's go to the cemetery tomorrow. Take some flowers." "Of course," Sarah nodded. "And we'll take the kids. Let them get used to honoring the memory of their ancestors." That evening, they sat in the kitchen for a long time, drinking tea and talking about the past, about the future, about how important it is to forgive and not hold grudges, how easy it is to lose loved ones, and how hard it is to then live with the realization that so much was left unsaid. Spring arrived suddenly, washing away the last traces of winter with warm rains. Chris and his family finished moving into his mother's apartment, which was gradually transforming light wallpaper replaced old dark ones. New furniture, children's drawings on the refrigerator. The children quickly settled into their new home. Ethan proudly showed his friends his room, and Annie set up a dollhouse on the windowsill, from which she had a view of the playground. One April day, when the sun was shining particularly brightly through the windows, Chris received an official letter from the insurance company. It turned out that the car in which David and Mia had crashed was fully insured by Robert, including life and health coverage for the driver and passengers. A significant insurance payout. Almost $20,000 was due to Chris as the heir. Chris stared at the notification for a long time, not knowing how to react. Money received in such a way seemed bitter. "What are we going to do with this amount?" Sarah asked when he showed her the letter. Chris pondered. I think it's worth setting up a children's educational fund for Ethan and Annie, and maybe make a donation to something to promote road safety or to help victims of car accidents. Something like that." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Good idea. Let something useful come out of this tragedy." That same day, they submitted an application to create a charitable project, Safe Roads, in memory of Eleanor and Mia. Part of the funds went to public service announcements against drunk driving, part to support families affected by accidents. On a June evening, when the children were already asleep, Chris sat on the balcony and watched the sunset. In his hands, he held an old photograph he had found among his mother's belongings, all of them together at the cabin, happy, smiling, still unaware of the trials the future would bring. Sarah quietly approached from behind and hugged her husband's shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "Life," Chris replied, not taking his gaze from the photograph. "About how strangely it sometimes turns. Mom wanted to deceive us to help Mia, and in the end, the boomerang came back and hit everyone." "The boomerang of fate," Sarah nodded. "But there's a good side to this story too. We got this apartment where our children are now growing up. We created a charitable project that helps people, and perhaps we've become wiser." Chris placed the photograph on the table and hugged his wife. "You're right. Life goes on, no matter what, and we need to cherish every moment spent with loved ones." They sat on the balcony for a long time, watching the first stars light up over the city. Somewhere out there, among those distant lights, were the souls of those they had lost, and for some reason, that evening, it seemed that they were looking at them and smiling approvingly. And on the table lay an old photograph, a testament that once they were all together and loved each other, each in their own way, and that love, despite all the mistakes and delusions, remained the only thing that held true value at the end of this difficult story.